In the endless flow of time, certain cities ascend to the pinnacle of power, radiant and magnificent, meticulously built over hundreds of years to reach their zenith. They stand defiant against every storm, seemingly immortal amidst the ebbs and flows of history. Yet, history also bears witness to grim tragedies, where once mighty cities, thought to be unshakable, vanished in a single fateful morning, losing everything accumulated over centuries. Lisbon, the legendary capital of Portugal, is precisely one such city, a poignant tale of rise, glory, downfall, and eventual rebirth. It seems almost incredible that a city, once the wealthiest economic heart of the world, commanding a monopolistic grip over the vital spice trade routes from the distant east to Europe, where proud kings once stood by the Tagus River, counting wind-filled galleons laden with treasures as they docked, could have begun its grand journey with a serendipitous turn of fate caused by an unexpected sea storm. Even more remarkable is how this city resiliently endured countless misfortunes, from the fires of war, devastating famines, and deadly plagues, to fierce struggles for the throne, and the dazzling zenith of a glorious maritime empire, only to be almost wiped off the map in an instant by a catastrophic earthquake, compounded by a tsunami and raging fires. However, what truly makes Lisbon's story compelling, demanding attention right to its final pages, lies not merely in its radiant splendor or the horrific moment of its destruction. It resonates with a chilling truth, echoing far more profoundly in the mind of every individual. It serves as an unceasing reminder: no power is eternal, no empire can forever remain at the apex of its might, and no city, however rich, pious, or proud it may be, is immune to the day history coldly turns its back. Lisbon, before it bore that name, was once a distinct entity. Before becoming the proud capital of the Kingdom of Portugal, before transforming into the prosperous gateway of Europe's wealthiest maritime empire, the city was an ancient, magnificent Islamic metropolis named Al-Ushbuna. It lay peacefully by the broad, slowly flowing Tagus River, encircled by solid, fortified stone walls that gazed out upon the vast expanse of the open sea. Then, a terrifying storm far offshore unexpectedly altered the course of destiny, irrevocably shifting the tide of history. It was the time of the Second Crusade, a journey fraught with hardship and peril. Hundreds of crusader sailing ships, propelled by a fervent desire for conquest and burning faith, had set sail from misty England, the prosperous Flanders region, and distant German lands, their bows set directly for Holy Jerusalem. Their objective was as clear as day, without a shred of doubt. Yet, the vast ocean has never cared for the intentions or plans of mere mortals. The weather abruptly turned. Fierce storms descended without warning, scattering the entire Crusader fleet onto the Portuguese coast. They were forced to drop anchor temporarily, awaiting a change in the winds, calmer seas, and hoping for fortune to smile upon them once more after a streak of ill luck. And it was at that precise moment, amidst confusion and despair, that a man appeared on the rocky shoreline. He introduced himself as the King of Portugal, though at that time his status was not yet officially recognized by the Church in Rome. He confidently approached the exhausted expeditionary force and presented a proposal that was utterly pragmatic, stark, yet incredibly enticing. Help me conquer a Muslim city to the south. In return, everything within that city, from precious goods, captives, to countless spoils of war, shall be entirely yours. The Crusaders, whose sacred mission was to reach Jerusalem, debated fiercely for days. Jerusalem was their ultimate goal, the oath they had carried from their homelands. Some vehemently opposed the offer, arguing that material greed could not be allowed to divert them from their chosen path, a path of faith and sacrifice. But in the end, the promise of a tangible victory within reach, of immediate and undeniable material wealth, triumphed over the distant oath to the mystical East. In an internal struggle, they nodded in agreement to the young king. 3 days later, the army advanced down the coast. Before them, a wide river quietly opened up, and in the distance lay Al-Ushbuna, the fortified Muslim city. That was Lisbon, before it truly bore that great name. What transpired next irrevocably altered the city's fate. From atop the towering city walls, the people of Al-Ushbuna watched in horror as colossal siege towers, higher than their defensive ramparts, warships blocking the river, and thousands of soldiers encircled the city for many arduous months. Al-Ushbuna had existed under that name for over 400 years by then, but history sometimes presents moments where even a tiny crack is enough to close an entire glorious era. Ultimately, the city walls crumbled. The city gates opened amidst chaos and despair. Under the terms of surrender, the Muslims were permitted to leave and save their lives. Some chose to depart, carrying the pain of loss and the hope for a new land. Those who remained were displaced outside the city walls, to a segregated quarter, later known as Moraria, the Moorish Quarter. That district still stands today, a stone memory, a silent reminder that this city did not begin under a single flag, but rather as an intersection, even a conflict, of many cultures. From that moment, Al-Ushbuna officially took on its new name, Lisbon. 108 years later, fortune smiled again when the city was honored to become the capital of a nation. But before ascending to that position of power and splendor, Lisbon still had to endure many severe trials, learning to survive the tumultuous storms of politics and power. The next upheaval originated deep within the royal family, like an internal fissure threatening to shatter the newly established stability. The last king of the founding dynasty died without a male heir, leaving behind only a daughter, Beatrice. She married Juan I of Castile, and Juan, with burning ambition, believed this marriage legitimately entitled him to the Portuguese throne. The majority of the Portuguese nobility, whether for self-interest or the sake of stability, agreed. For them, it was a logical arrangement, avoiding bloodshed and maintaining order. But Lisbon's merchant class and common people did not. They resolutely sided with another, João of Avis, an illegitimate child, yet bearing the old royal bloodline. João did not possess a perfect claim, nor a solid legal foundation for the throne. But he had something more crucial at that historical moment. He had the entirety of Lisbon standing behind him, a city with a powerful and resilient will. Juan I, refusing to accept this defiance, brought his army to besiege Lisbon. The city was hermetically sealed. The Castilian fleet stretched chains across the Tagus River, blocking all supply routes. Nothing could enter, and nothing could leave. Inside the city walls, famine and disease began to ravage the populace. Outside, 20,000 formidable Castilian troops showed no intention of retreating, determined to subdue the city. Then, fate intervened in an unexpected manner. The Black Death, one of history's most horrific pandemics, suddenly appeared and swept through the Castilian military camp. The epidemic accomplished what swords and arrows had failed to do. One commander after another, one soldier after another fell. Every tent became a makeshift burial ground, a scene of horror and despair. Even Beatrice, the woman whose claim to inheritance this war purported to protect, succumbed in the besieged camp. Juan, witnessing his army rotting away with disease, was compelled to burn his tents and retreat in humiliation. Lisbon did not truly win by military might. The city simply outlasted the terrible calamity before it, demonstrating extraordinary tenacity. A year later, João of Avis ascended to the throne, supported by all the people of Lisbon. The House of Avis began a glorious dynasty, ruling Portugal for 2 centuries. And under that golden age, Lisbon did not merely survive, it exploded, transforming itself into a major power. For decades, Portuguese kings had nurtured and pursued an almost unimaginable dream, a grand adventure, to find a sea route around Africa to reach mysterious India. The motivation was not romance, nor merely a thirst for adventure. It was for commerce, for spices as precious as pure gold, for the greatest and most lucrative path to wealth of the era. The one ultimately chosen to complete this historic voyage, marking a new epoch, was Vasco da Gama, a talented and courageous navigator. Imagine that fateful morning when he departed from Belém harbor. 4 resilient sailing ships, tiny against the vast ocean. His brother, Paulo, commanded the second vessel. 170 brave souls embarked, carrying the hopes and destiny of an entire nation. On shore, the entire city poured out to bid farewell, from solemn clergy and powerful nobles to men, women, and children. Not a single person on that beach knew who would be fortunate enough to return, or who would forever lie buried in uncharted waters beyond Europe's maps, where only waves and mystery reigned. Da Gama embarked on a route that existed only in theory, a daring idea never before attempted, and 2 years later, a miracle occurred. He returned in glory, bearing living proof of the Eastern Sea route. From that historic moment, everything accelerated at a dizzying pace. One fleet after another departed Lisbon, filled with ambition and returning laden with riches. In less than a decade, Lisbon held almost exclusive control over the spice route from India to Europe. Venetian merchants, who had monopolized pepper and other spices for centuries, were now forced to purchase pepper directly in Lisbon at exorbitant prices. The city swelled, then swelled again, constantly growing. Its population rose to nearly 200,000, an enormous figure for that time. 1 in 10 residents was of African descent, creating a multicultural and vibrant Lisbon. Then, Brazil was discovered, opening up an inexhaustible source of resources. Gold, sugar, precious woods, diverse goods, manpower, and power incessantly poured into the Tagus estuary, transforming it into the center of the New World. Money flowed like a river, funding the construction of magnificent churches, grand palaces, and monumental monasteries. A new, unique architectural style, imbued with a strong maritime character, emerged, known as manuline. In it, stone was exquisitely carved into twisted ropes, ship anchors, exotic corals, and mythical creatures from the edge of the known world. This was no longer just stone. It was a powerful declaration, an empire written in white limestone, affirming Portugal's strength and stature. And remarkably, despite the empire's meteoric rise and extraordinary development, the old city largely retained its fundamental appearance. The strong castle still stood firm on the high hill, overlooking the panorama. The medieval walls still wound along the slopes. The white houses clustered together as they had for centuries, creating a distinctive beauty. The Say Cathedral, built in 1147 directly on the foundations of the old Grand Mosque, still stood proudly as a silent affirmation that each era does not entirely erase the one before it. It merely builds upon the remnants, preserving the sedimented layers of history. There is a thought-provoking detail here. People often assume that power and wealth will immediately and completely transform the face of a city, but this is not always the case. An empire can flourish rapidly in just a few years, reaching its peak. However, a city, with its rich history and complex structure, needs centuries to truly undergo a comprehensive metamorphosis. By the 16th century, Lisbon had become a place where all civilizations, all worlds, converged daily, creating an unprecedentedly vibrant and multi-ethnic tapestry. In the vast square near the waterfront, one could easily encounter Portuguese nobility in luxurious attire, Ottoman merchants with their distinctive turbans, robust dockworkers, soldiers in uniform, clerics in robes, African men of various complexions, precious goods from India, glittering gold coins from Brazil, and urgent news from the distant ocean. A sack of pepper bought in India for just 2 cruzados could be sold here for 30. The King of Portugal naturally became the wealthiest monarch in Europe, possessing immense riches. The Tagus River at that time was no longer merely a river. It was the center of the world, the lifeblood of prosperity in the eyes of Lisbon's people. Every ship approaching the city had to pass through Cascais, the last safe haven before sailing upriver into the world's richest port. And right on the banks of Belém, the magnificent Jerónimos Monastery began construction in 1501, just 3 years after Da Gama's return from his historic voyage. The construction spanned an entire century, financed by a 5% tax on spices imported from the east, what was known as the pepper tax. Every ornate stone column, every intricately carved ceiling vault, every minute detail was paid for by the colossal profits from maritime trade. But, as history's chilling warning dictates, no power, however mighty, can eternally hold the pinnacle of dominance. The death of a king without a direct successor triggered a severe crisis. Spain seized this opportunity to claim the Portuguese throne, annexing the kingdom. The Dutch, with their powerful fleet, began to dismantle Lisbon's exclusive spice network, slowly stripping away its immense profits. What had once propelled Lisbon to global preeminence now began to slip from its grasp. India no longer sent pepper as before. Instead, Brazil supplied raw gold. Lisbon was no longer the sole center of the world, but it remained one of Europe's most magnificent and proud cities, with an indelible beauty and history. The grand and splendid Ribera Palace stretched along the river-facing square, a witness to countless historical events. Luxurious carriages, noble dignitaries, busy merchants, playing children, and dogs bustled across that vast courtyard every day. It was from here that Princess Catherine of Braganza once departed for England to marry Charles II, bringing with her a magnificent dowry that included both Bombay and Tangier. Here, too, the court held extravagant, lavish ceremonies, sustained by an endless supply of Brazilian gold, continuing the glory that pepper had once built, yet also signaling a profound shift. Viewed from afar, Lisbon then appeared impenetrable, a steadfast fortress of power and prosperity. The ancient castle towered on the high hill. The splendid palace lay by the riverbank. The majestic Belém Tower guarded the estuary. The immense Jeronimos monastery stretched along the shore. 250,000 people resided within. 6 centuries of history piled upon one another in a glorious, seemingly eternal tableau. And then, in a single fateful morning, almost everything vanished, reduced to dust. On 1st November 1755, All Saints' Day, a sacred day, every church in Lisbon was packed with worshippers, candles lit everywhere, shimmering mysteriously. Europe's most pious city was deep in prayer when, at precisely 9:40 a.m., the ground suddenly moved with violent force. The epicenter was located in the Atlantic Ocean, approximately 200 kilometers offshore. Its magnitude was estimated between 8.5 and 9 on the Richter scale, making it one of the largest earthquakes ever to strike Europe. In Lisbon, the shaking lasted for 6 terrifying minutes. Streets ripped open into gigantic fissures, swallowing everything. Houses, which had stood for hundreds of years, collapsed in mere seconds. Churches, full of people, instantly transformed into colossal stone traps, burying thousands of lives. Those fortunate enough to survive frantically fled towards the waterfront, seeking open spaces, seeking what they mistakenly believed to be safety. There they witnessed a strange, terrifying phenomenon. The Tagus River suddenly receded dramatically, exposing its profound depths, muddy bottom, shipwrecks, and countless long-lost goods. Some, in desperation and panic, rushed down to salvage whatever appeared before their eyes, heedless of the danger. 40 minutes later, the water returned, but not as a normal, gentle tide. Instead, it was a colossal, sky-high wall of water. 3 horrifying tsunami waves surged directly into the city through the river estuary, sweeping away everything in their path. After the earthquake and tsunami, the calamity was still not over. Fires erupted from every corner, burning incessantly for 5 days and 5 nights, transforming Lisbon into a hellish sea of flames. 30,000 to 40,000 people perished. 85% of the city's structures were completely destroyed. The Lisbon people had believed eternal, believed indestructible, vanished in a single morning. Yet, not all was lost to the inferno. The steadfast walls of Sé Cathedral endured, though its roof was consumed by the flames. The southern tower succumbed, and the main roof caved in, but its overall structural integrity held. It was meticulously repaired, rebuilt, and stands resiliently upon its ancient hill to this very day. The Tower of Belém, a sentinel by the Tagus, stoically survived. The magnificent Jeronimos monastery remained standing. Even the venerable castle of São Jorge, with its commanding views, persisted. A few fragments of stone, a handful of structures, remained as silent witnesses, testifying that history, though it can be crushed and profoundly wounded, is never entirely erased. The Grand Ribera Palace, however, could not be salvaged. While its remaining walls were structurally sound enough for repair, the decision was made to demolish it, an act that symbolized a definitive shift, a fresh start. Upon its former footprint, the expansive and windswept Praça do Comércio was erected, opening up a majestic vista onto the river. Yet, locals affectionately continued to refer to the area by its old name, Terreiro do Passo, the Palace Square. The palace itself vanished nearly 3 centuries ago, but its memory steadfastly lingers in the nomenclature, etched deep within the hearts of the people. Following the horrific catastrophe, the king, deeply traumatized, refused to sleep in any stone building, his fear etched indelibly into his mind. The royal court consequently relocated to makeshift tents on the Ajuda Hill. It was precisely here that Lisbon's most crucial, most revolutionary lesson began to take shape, ultimately reshaping the entire intellectual landscape of a continent. The disaster did not merely devastate a city, it fundamentally altered how Europe thought, how humanity perceived the world around it. Voltaire, deeply moved, penned reflections on it, pondering the profound meaning of suffering. Kant, the great philosopher, wrote on the event, posing deep philosophical questions about existence and divine will. People no longer simply asked why God had punished them. Instead, a new, more rational inquiry began. What had truly transpired? How did it happen? And crucially, how could future damage be mitigated? How could similar tragedies be averted? The Marquis of Pombal, a statesman of formidable intellect and foresight, dispatched detailed questionnaires to every parish across the nation. He sought answers to precise questions. How long did the tremors last? Which houses withstood the shaking? Which collapsed? How high did the water rise? And from what direction? This initiative is widely regarded as one of humanity's first systematic scientific surveys of an earthquake. He spearheaded Lisbon's reconstruction along a new, expansive, and modern street grid, building structures with a unique timber frame construction integrated within the walls. Ingeniously dubbed the Pombaline Cage, designed to resist seismic shocks effectively. In an astonishing display of early engineering, soldiers were even marched around miniature models of buildings to simulate vibrations and test their structural resilience. This was the pivotal moment humanity began to grasp that suffering is not solely for lamentation, nor merely for sinking into despair. Suffering, instead, must be transformed into memory, into invaluable lessons, and into vital survival skills to overcome the challenges that invariably lie ahead. For me, this is the most powerful and poignant aspect of Lisbon's story. It is not simply about how wealthy the city once was, how many precious spices it controlled, or how many grand monasteries and palaces it built. Rather, it is because after countless changes of name, shifts in dynasties, transformations of faith, and reversals of fortune, even after being torn apart by the earth and engulfed by the sea, Lisbon steadfastly rose again. Though no longer the same city it once was, it remains Lisbon, carrying the indelible marks of its past and the vibrant breath of its future. And perhaps it is precisely at this juncture that Lisbon's narrative transcends Portugal's specific history to become a profoundly modern, acutely relevant reminder for any society that lives under the illusion of being too strong, too wealthy, too stable to ever collapse. Bustling, vibrant ports can fall silent overnight. Palaces once believed eternal can crumble into dust. Commercial networks that once nourished a mighty empire can be superseded, lost to time. And the most dazzling cities sometimes prove to be the most fragile, most vulnerable, precisely when they believe themselves to be safest, most invincible. Looking back at Lisbon, what remains is not merely ancient ruins or the remnants of the past, but the extraordinary way a great civilization responded to loss, to catastrophe. The city chose not to dwell in nostalgic yearning for what was, nor to wallow in regret. It learned relentlessly, meticulously collected data, measured precisely, rebuilt scientifically, and adapted to survive. This constitutes the monumental difference between a place that was once great and a place that possesses the courage and the will to continue existing. to flourish even after its golden age has passed. I believe this is the greatest value that subsequent generations can glean from this story. We often admire achievements, wealth, symbols of power, and the glorious heydays of empires. But history should not merely be studied to extol peaks of glory or to venerate greatness. It also needs to be understood for the high cost of complacency, of self-satisfaction, to know that a strong society is not one that never falters, but one that knows how to mend itself, how to rise after every fall, and how to transform suffering into strength. A city may lose its magnificent palaces, its bustling trading ports, its central position in the world. But if memory persists, if the will to rise remains, and if it retains the capacity to learn from its mistakes, it can still move forward. It can still write new chapters of its enduring story. Perhaps this is what allows Lisbon's tale to touch the hearts of readers and listeners far more powerfully than a story solely filled with triumph and glory. Because ultimately, what inspires human admiration is not the absence of ever falling, but rather having been knocked down repeatedly, having weathered countless storms, yet refusing to disappear, persevering with unyielding fortitude. Almost 900 years after the crusaders stormed the gates of Al-Ushbuna, one can still walk upon those ancient walls today, touching the very traces of history. One can gaze down upon modern Lisbon and discern layers of time superimposed, like an open book. Contemporary Lisbon is vastly different from the ancient Al-Ushbuna, yet somewhere in the stone, in the streets, in the surviving old names, the city remembers everything, carrying within itself the memories of millennia. And perhaps that is the truest, most profound definition of a great city. Not a place that has never fallen, never known sorrow, but a place that, after each time history has struck it down, still knows how to rise, to dust off the past, and to recount its own story, a story brimming with resilience and indomitable spirit. If you have listened this far, perhaps you will see that Lisbon is not just the tale of a distant, ancient European city. It is also a story about how time tests every civilization, every society, and about how humanity must constantly face momentous choices between forgetting and remembering, between complacency and vigilance, between regretting the past and resolutely rebuilding the future. And that is precisely why stories such as these must continue to be told. Not to look back at the past romantically or nostalgically, but to look forward with greater clarity and wisdom for our present. If you appreciate content rich in history, philosophy, and contemplation such as this, please stay and continue to join us. For the treasure trove of history holds many more cities concealing secrets, many more empires rising and falling, and many more moments that seem to have concluded, yet still possess the power to speak something profoundly true and meaningful to our present day.